Hi, some students were really curious as to the answers to the scavenger hunt questions, and so I thought I would do a video walkthrough of the scavenger hunt. It's all about the history of science. So the first clue was fairly easy to find if you were looking for a scavenger hunt and you realized that QR codes were involved. It took a few students a little while to make that connection, but when they asked me about the scavenger hunt, I would say, well, if I were going to hide something in plain sight in my classroom, I would probably hide it as some kind of a code. And most students came to the conclusion that it had to do with the QR codes, which my classroom posters all have a QR code on them, and this QR code that's in the middle of each of the posters links to a website that has something to do with that poster. These are viruses, so this links to a website that explains a little bit about viruses. But this is the only poster that has two QR codes. So most students, as soon as they realized that it had to do with QR codes, realized that it probably was the poster that was a little bit different. And so to get a QR code scanned, you need a phone with a scanner, or you can do it with our devices. There's a way to scan QR codes with one of our laptop computers, but most students have some kind of smartphone. If you have an Android, there's a built-in QR code scanner, but if you have an iPhone, then you have to download a QR code scanner, and I helped students figure that out if they didn't already know. So if you come and you scan this QR code, it starts the scavenger hunt. And you get the message if you scan that QR code that you've started the scavenger hunt. There's a little bit about the scavenger hunt, that there's a prize, and the prize only goes to the first person who figures it out. The first clue is at the center of things, and it also tells you that you need to talk with me to get a document that will help you figure out what the first clue is. This is the first document. It is a letter that's really kind of hard to make out. It's talking about Galileo's idea that the sun is stationary and the earth moves around it, and how that's a really dumb idea as far as these guys are concerned. And so with the clue at the center of things and the document, you can figure out that it's talking about the sun. So then you have to walk around the classroom and try to find a sun. Over here, I have a sun. If you lift this up, there's a QR code underneath. It gives you the clue, a tool of discovery. And you also get a document. The document for this QR code looks like this. And then it has some really pretty drawings on the back. So this, I think, is the only document that's double-sided. It's a document written by please excuse my pronunciation. It's written by Antony von Leeuwenhoek, and it's talking about microscopic things, but it's also talking about weeds that grow in water. So some students had a really hard time figuring out what this talked about. It took them a while to come to the conclusion that it had something to do with the microscope. I had lots of students that were looking underneath my plants in the windowsill. This clue took students a long time to figure out, but eventually, if they were persistent, they would realize that one of my microscopes is sitting out, and they would scan the QR code underneath it. When you scan this QR code, the clue you get is the man, and the document you get looks like this. It took students quite a while to figure out who this guy was. There's a little diagram here. There's a bunch of finches with different beaks, and there's an old guy with a big beard and a hat. If you've taken biology already, then you have a leg up on this question, because you probably already know who this guy is. But a lot of people who are trying to do this scavenger hunt are just starting biology, and they've never heard of him before. His name is Charles Darwin. I opened the scavenger hunt up to all of my classes, but the student who won was a biology student, so he should be pretty proud of himself because he solved this problem. To find the QR code, you had to go over here, and I did tell the students they were allowed to lift up the edges of different posters and look behind them. So they knew But there are a lot of posters like this in my classroom, and most of them don't have QR codes on the back, so you kind of had to figure out who Darwin was before you got here. But if you scan the back of Darwin's little poster, you get the clue, because of him, it's safer. The document for this one was kind of confusing, and you had to look for information from other sources in order to solve this problem. In fact, I think the only student who solved this one is the student who won. He went home over the weekend. He came in on a Friday, stayed after school trying to find the answer to this question. Didn't answer it. Well, he figured out who this was. It was Pasteur. This was the document. It doesn't say Pasteur on it anywhere. There's a picture of a guy, a weird apparatus, and then at the bottom it says, "Chance favors the prepared mind." The way to figure out who this guy was, the easiest way to figure out who this guy was is to Google that phrase. If you Google that phrase, Louis Pasteur comes up. It's a short hop to figure out that it's milk, or that it's probably milk. There are other things it could have been. But he couldn't find the milk jug, mostly because he wasn't looking up. As soon as you look up, you find this, and there is a QR code on the bottom of the milk jug. You scan the QR code on the bottom of the milk jug, and the clue is he figured it out. And your document looks like this. Again, people who've already had biology know who this guy is. But if you haven't had biology, it can be kind of difficult to figure it out. Luckily, this student had, by this time, combed my classroom, and he had already found this QR code. He hadn't found the question, the clue that went with it, but he had already found the code, so it was easier for him to answer. And it's on the back of this little display here, which has different kinds of corn and shows the genotypes of the different kinds of corn. When you scan the back of the corn, you get the clue, she wrote it. And your document looks like this. There's a letter on there signed by somebody named Rachel. There's a thing up here that says DDT, and there's a picture of a woman. Again, if you've already had biology, or if you've just been around a while, you probably already know that this is Rachel Carson. But if you don't, then you would have the clue that she wrote it. You might try Googling. I don't think that's how they figured this out. I think that the student that figured this out, he figured it out because it said she wrote it, so he went and he rifled through all my books until he found one that was written by somebody named Rachel. My bookshelf is a mess. And you would see that, here we go. The reason it's a mess is because students have been rifling through it. Here's my copy of Silent Spring. You had to open it up and flip through the pages a little bit to find the QR code, but it's the only book I have. I think it's the only book I have by a Rachel. So that's how he solved that problem. You get the clue. Without her, the men who discovered this would have been up a crick, which is me trying to be clever. The document that you get is, now if you've had my biology class, then you'll recognize this woman, and you'll recognize this picture. It says, the results suggest a helical structure which must be very closely packed, containing probably 2, 3, or 4 coaxial nucleic acid chains per helical unit, and having the phosphate groups near the outside. Just the word helical is a pretty good clue, and if you know that, even if you don't get the crick joke, you'll figure out we're talking about DNA. And I have on the front of my desk here a lot of science-based internet memes. One of them has to do with DNA, and if you look on the back of it, there's a QR code. And if you scan that QR code, you get a message that says you won. And that is the scavenger hunt. It takes a long time to put one of these together. I probably won't do it again until at least the next unit, but I will post to Twitter when I start a new scavenger hunt, and I won't give away any hints this time. Good luck! This video is going to be so much fun to edit.